I think I didn't do anything wrong, just made a choice that felt right at the time. But when the envelope from his lawyer landed on our kitchen table, my hand started shaking. My husband found out about my affair with our lawyer, and I regretted it that same night. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. I'm not saying I did anything wrong, just that maybe I handled things badly. When I saw the envelope on the kitchen table that morning, with my name printed under his lawyer's letterhead, my stomach dropped. Daniel didn't shout, didn't accuse, didn't even look at me. He just left that envelope like a quiet explosion waiting for me to open. Inside were papers, cold, official, and final. I remember thinking, he can't mean this, not after everything we've built, not after all the times I forgave him for making me feel invisible. It all started months ago, when I began working late at the firm. Marcus, my boss, always noticed when I looked tired or quiet. He'd say things like, I deserved to be appreciated more, that Daniel didn't see how lucky he was. I told myself it was harmless. Just talk, just attention I'd been missing. I didn't plan to cross a line. But when I did, it felt like a secret I deserved to keep. Now I'm standing in the same kitchen where Daniel used to kiss my forehead every morning, staring at the legal papers that say my choices have consequences I can't charm my way out of. The morning after the papers came, I sat at the kitchen table staring at my cold coffee, pretending I still lived a normal life. The house was too quiet, no clinking of Daniel's mug, no hum of his morning playlist. Just silence and that heavy, empty space between what I thought my marriage was and what it had become. I kept replaying everything, trying to find the exact moment things started to slip. Maybe it was when I began staying late at the firm. Maybe it was earlier, when Daniel stopped looking at me the way he used to. I work as a paralegal at Hale & Winters, a small but respected firm downtown. It's not glamorous, but it used to make me feel important. I liked the way clients looked at me when I handed them neat folders and explained things clearly. I liked being needed. Daniel never made me feel that way anymore. He was always busy with his projects, always tired when he got home. He'd sit at the dining table with blueprints spread out, barely noticing when I changed my hair or when I dressed up for dinner. So, when Marcus Hale started paying attention, I didn't think it was dangerous. He's the senior attorney, mid-40s, confident, always with that calm voice people listen to. He noticed small things, when I stayed late, when I wore a new shade of lipstick, when I sighed without realizing it. He'd stop by my desk and ask if I was all right, if Daniel and I were still happy, if I ever felt appreciated. He had this way of asking questions that sounded like concern, but felt like flattery. I told myself it was harmless. After all, he was married too. One evening, he offered to drive me home after we finished organizing a client file. It was raining hard, and my car was in the far lot. He said it wasn't safe for me to walk alone. I remember how easy it was to say yes. The drive was short, filled with light conversation. He said I reminded him of someone who used to make him feel alive before everything in his life turned into paperwork. I laughed, told him not to say things like that, but inside, I liked it. I liked it too much. When I got home, Daniel was sitting on the couch watching a documentary. He looked up, smiled faintly, and asked if I'd eaten. That was it. No question about the rain, no interest in how late I was. I told him I had dinner with co-workers. He said, "That's nice," without looking away from the screen. I went upstairs, stood in front of the mirror, and told myself he just wasn't good with words. That he loved me, just differently. The next week, Marcus started texting me small things. Nothing improper at first. Work notes, jokes about cases, memes about coffee and deadlines. Then they turned personal. "Rough day. You deserve better. He's lucky to have you." Wish I could see that smile again. I knew where it was heading, but I didn't stop it. I told myself it wasn't cheating if nothing happened. One Friday night, Daniel called saying he'd be late, another project deadline. I didn't even pretend to be disappointed. I stayed at the office with Marcus to finish a report. The lights were dim, the building nearly empty. When he touched my hand as I handed him a document, I didn't pull away. He said something about how people only get one life and shouldn't waste it feeling unseen. I laughed nervously, said he was being dramatic. He smiled and said, "You don't believe you deserve more?" I told myself he was just being kind. That's how it always starts, isn't it? A compliment that feels like oxygen after months of holding your breath. We sat too close, talked too softly. I remember saying I felt invisible sometimes, that Daniel didn't understand me anymore. Marcus said I wasn't invisible to him. I wish I could say that was the moment I stopped it, but it wasn't. That night I came home late. Daniel was already asleep. I looked at him lying there, his hand resting on the empty side of the bed, and felt something twisted, a mix of guilt and irritation. Guilt because I knew what I was doing was wrong. Irritation because part of me blamed him for making it so easy. I climbed into bed quietly and told myself it wasn't a big deal. I hadn't crossed any real line. Not yet. Over the next few weeks, I started resenting how ordinary everything felt. Daniel's routines, the same dinners, the same small talk about weather and work. I told my sister Evelyn that I felt like I was married to a wall. She told me Daniel was a good man and I was lucky. I laughed it off, said she didn't understand what it's like to be bored out of your mind. She said boredom wasn't a reason to destroy a marriage. I said, "I'm not destroying anything." At work, Marcus and I grew closer. He'd stop by my desk, compliment my perfume, lean in just close enough for me to smell his cologne. It wasn't long before we were staying late almost every evening. One night, as we stood near the copy machine, he told me he couldn't stop thinking about me. I told him to stop saying things like that. He asked, "Do you want me to?" I didn't answer. When I got home that night, Daniel was in the kitchen fixing the cabinet hinge. He smiled when he saw me. "Hey, I thought we could watch that new series together." I told him I was exhausted. He said, "You've been working a lot lately." I shrugged. "Someone has to." He looked confused, then said quietly, "You don't have to bite every time I talk to you." I rolled my eyes and went upstairs. Later, I heard him on the phone with his mother, telling her I'd been distant. I felt angry that he was talking about me behind my back. The irony didn't even hit me. I spent the next morning complaining to Fiona, a coworker who always loved gossip. I told her Daniel was becoming controlling, that he didn't understand how stressful my job was. She nodded, pretending to care, probably already guessing what was going on between Marcus and me. It all felt so easy back then, like I was living two lives and getting away with both. In one, I was the tired wife of a man who didn't appreciate her. In the other, I was the confident woman who made a powerful man lose his composure. I didn't see how fragile both lives were. The night everything shifted, Daniel came home early. I was in the shower, and my phone buzzed on the counter. A message popped up from Marcus. "Can't stop thinking about last night." Daniel never said anything about it that night, but I noticed the change immediately. The way he watched me without speaking, the way he started keeping his phone close too. I told myself he was being paranoid. When I mentioned Marcus's name the next day, Daniel's jaw tightened. He asked, calm but cold, why I spent so many late nights at work with a married man. I said he was being ridiculous, that I was working. He asked why Marcus was texting me outside office hours. I said he was helping me with a case. He didn't argue. He just said, "I hope you're being honest." I laughed, told him he needed to trust me more. That night I called Evelyn and told her Daniel was acting jealous and irrational. She said, "Maybe he's just hurt." I said, "He has no reason to be." But deep down, I knew he did. And still, I told myself I had everything under control. I thought I could juggle the lies, the guilt, and the marriage without anything slipping through. When Daniel kissed me goodnight that evening, I could feel the distance in him. It was like he already knew, but he was waiting for proof. I turned off the light, telling myself I'd fix it tomorrow. I just didn't know tomorrow would be too late. Monday mornings at the firm always felt too bright, like the lights were trying to expose every secret I was hiding. I remember staring at my reflection in the elevator mirror, touching up my lipstick and telling myself to act normal. Marcus had been quieter lately, less texting, fewer smiles in the hallway. It shouldn't have bothered me, but it did. I told myself it was just because we needed to be careful, that he was being smart. But when I caught him laughing with another paralegal by the coffee machine, something sharp twisted in my chest. Daniel and I were barely talking at home by then. He had started leaving earlier in the mornings and coming home late. I knew he was doing it on purpose, creating space, waiting for me to notice. I told myself he was punishing me for having a life outside of him. He'd ask simple questions, what time I'd be home, who I was having lunch with, and I'd snap like he'd accused me of something. I could see the confusion in his eyes, the hurt, but I refused to give him the satisfaction of an explanation. That week, Marcus called me into his office to review a case file. I expected the usual lingering glances, the slow smile, but he was all business. No jokes, no warmth. When I asked if something was wrong, he said he just wanted to focus on work. I laughed it off and told him not to be so serious. He didn't laugh. "We should be more careful," he said. "People notice things." The words hit harder than I expected. I told him no one was paying attention, that we were fine. He sighed and said, "Lysandra, this isn't a game." The way he said my name made me feel small. I hated that feeling. I left his office pretending to be unbothered, but my chest felt tight the rest of the day. That night, I got home to find Daniel sitting at the kitchen table with bills spread out. He didn't even look up when I came in. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat across from him. "Rough day?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He nodded. "Same here," I added quickly, waiting for him to ask. He didn't. Instead, he said we needed to talk about money. Apparently, my spending had gotten out of hand. I laughed, told him he was overreacting, that it was just a few online orders. He said quietly, "You keep saying that every month." I felt cornered, so I deflected. I told him maybe if he paid more attention to me, I wouldn't need to buy things to feel better. He looked up, eyes tired. "You really think that's the problem?" he asked. I rolled my eyes and said, "I don't know. Maybe I just want to feel like my husband notices me once in a while." It sounded reasonable in my head, but when I said it out loud, it sounded like something a teenager would say. He stood up, collected the bills, and said he was going for a walk. I shouted after him that I wasn't the one who'd ruined the night, but he didn't turn around. When the door shut, I sat there staring at the half-empty wine glass, feeling both furious and scared. The next morning, I went to work determined to regain control of something. Marcus avoided me again, and by lunchtime, I couldn't stand it anymore. I followed him into the break room, asked if we were okay. He gave me this tight smile and said, "Of course we are. Let's just slow down." I told him he didn't get to make that decision alone. He looked at me for a long moment and said, "You're married, Lysandra. You can't act like I'm the bad guy for remembering that." I wanted to scream. Instead, I smiled like it didn't matter and walked out. My hands were shaking the entire afternoon. That night, Daniel asked if I was all right. For a second, I almost told him everything. Not about Marcus, but about how empty I felt. But then he mentioned he had a meeting the next day and couldn't make dinner again, and all that softness vanished. I told him it didn't matter, that I was used to eating alone. He asked why I was being cruel. I said, "Maybe I learned it from you." By Friday, things at home were colder than ever. Daniel started keeping his phone face down, which drove me crazy. I caught myself checking it when he was in the shower, just to see if he was talking to anyone. There was nothing suspicious, but that didn't stop me from feeling angry. When he asked if I was okay, I said I was tired of being treated like a ghost in my own house. He said, "Then stop acting like one." I laughed and told him to stop trying to sound clever. At work, Marcus's behavior grew more distant. One afternoon, I overheard two co-workers whispering near the copier. My name came up. They stopped talking when I entered, pretending they'd been discussing a client. I felt my skin burn. I messaged Marcus later that night, saying people were starting to talk. He replied, "Then maybe it's best we don't give them more reason to." That message felt like betrayal. I read it 3 times, trying to find a softer meaning. There wasn't one. I called him, but he didn't answer. I spent the night pacing, telling myself he was just being cautious, that it would blow over. The next morning, Daniel made breakfast. Pancakes, his attempt at peace. He said we should have a weekend just for us, no work, no distractions. I should have said yes. Instead, I told him I had to go into the office to finish a project. He looked disappointed but didn't argue. That almost made me angrier. Why couldn't he fight for me, demand to know why I was always gone? Instead, he just let me walk away like none of it mattered. At the office, Marcus wasn't there. His secretary said he'd taken the day off. I stared at his empty desk for a long time, wondering if he'd really just moved on without me. I told myself I didn't care, but I did. I cared more than I wanted to admit. When I got home that evening, Daniel was waiting in the living room. He asked if we could talk. I said I was exhausted. He said, "You're always exhausted lately." I sighed and told him work had been stressful. He looked at me, quiet for a long time, and finally said, "Do you want to be here, Lysandra?" The question stunned me. I asked what he meant. He said, "You barely speak to me. You flinch when I touch you. You come home later every week. If you don't want this marriage anymore, just say it." I told him he was imagining things. He said, "Maybe, but I'm not stupid." That night I cried in the bathroom, not out of guilt, but out of anger that everything was slipping out of my control. I told myself I was the one being wronged, that Daniel had pushed me away, that Marcus had led me on. I believed it, at least for a little while. The next few days, Daniel stopped asking questions. He came home quietly, ate dinner in silence, and went to bed early. I thought his calm meant things were improving, that maybe he'd accepted me again. But then small things started happening. Documents missing from my desk at home. The joint credit card declined at a store. My work laptop suddenly locked out of shared folders. When I asked Daniel if he'd changed any passwords, he said maybe I should check with the bank. His tone was polite, but there was something in his eyes I hadn't seen before. It wasn't anger, it was calculation. I tried to shake the feeling off, told myself I was being paranoid. But that night, when I opened my email, there was a message from Human Resources. Subject line, "Confidential inquiry." My stomach turned before I even opened it, and that was the first time I realized Marcus wasn't the only one being careful anymore. Daniel was too. The HR email turned out to be short, polite, and terrifying. They wanted to clarify professional boundaries regarding a potentially inappropriate working relationship with one of the firm's partners. No names were written, but I didn't need them to be. My hands shook as I scrolled to the end of the message. It said a meeting was scheduled for the following Monday, and I was expected to attend. I sat at my desk, the office suddenly feeling smaller than it had ever been. The walls, the glass, the quiet clicking of keyboards, it all pressed in on me. I glanced toward Marcus's office, the door closed, blinds drawn. For the first time, I realized how alone I actually was. I called him, whispering, "What's going on?" He answered after a long pause. His voice was low, measured. "You should cooperate fully. Keep it professional." I asked if he'd told them anything. He said, "They were already asking questions. It's better if we stay consistent." Consistent? Like we'd rehearsed a lie. I wanted to scream, but instead I said, "You're not throwing me under the bus, are you?" He exhaled, tired. "Lysandra, this was never supposed to be complicated." Then he hung up. That was the moment I understood. He wasn't going to protect me. Marcus had already chosen himself. At home, Daniel noticed something was wrong. I tried to act normal, but I could tell my hands were shaking even as I set the table for dinner. He asked if I was all right. I said work was stressful. He said, "You've been saying that for months." I snapped that he wouldn't understand. He just nodded slowly and said, "Maybe not." We ate in silence. The clock ticked louder than usual. Then, out of nowhere, Daniel said, "Your boss called today." I froze. "Marcus?" I asked, my voice thin. "He left a voicemail on the house phone," Daniel said evenly. "Said he hoped everything was okay with the upcoming HR meeting." The world tilted for a second. I said something like, "Oh, it's just a misunderstanding. Office politics." Daniel watched me quietly, his expression unreadable. "Is that what it is?" he asked. I forced a smile, nodded, and changed the subject. He didn't press, but I knew he didn't believe me. That night, I barely slept. My thoughts kept spinning. Marcus's cold tone, the HR email, Daniel's calm eyes. It all felt like pieces moving without me, a chessboard I no longer understood. Monday came too soon. The HR meeting was clinical. A woman from compliance asked questions in a neutral voice. Had I been meeting privately with Marcus? Were any personal messages exchanged? I lied smoothly, saying everything was professional. She nodded, took notes, thanked me for my honesty. When I returned to my desk, Marcus wasn't there. By lunchtime, I got an internal memo. Marcus Hale was on administrative leave pending review. My stomach dropped. I tried to call him again, but his number went straight to voicemail. Later that afternoon, Fiona stopped by my desk pretending to ask about a file. Her eyes sparkled with gossip. "Rough day, huh?" she said. I told her I didn't know what she meant. She smiled thinly. "Come on, Lysandra. People talk." By the end of the day, everyone was whispering. I could feel their eyes on me every time I passed in the hallway. I wanted to walk out, but pride kept me seated. I told myself I could still fix things. When I got home that evening, Daniel was in the living room helping Noah with homework. For a second, the sight softened me. Their heads bent together, his calm voice guiding our son through math problems. I wanted to step into that moment, pretend everything was fine. But Noah looked up and asked, "Mum, are you in trouble at work?" I froze. Daniel didn't say anything. My heart pounded. "Why would you ask that?" I said lightly. Noah shrugged. "Grandma said people were saying bad things about you." I looked at Daniel. "You told your mother?" I asked. He didn't flinch. "She asked why you've been so tense lately. I told her you're under review at work." "You had no right," I snapped. "That's private." Daniel looked up from the workbook, his tone calm but sharp. So was our marriage. The words hit harder than I wanted to admit. I opened my mouth to argue but couldn't find anything that didn't sound defensive. I went upstairs, slammed the bedroom door, and cried, not out of guilt, but humiliation. The next few days were a blur. Marcus officially resigned, citing personal reasons. My co-workers avoided me completely. Fiona stopped sitting with me at lunch. Even the receptionist looked away when I walked past. I started feeling sick every morning, forcing myself to go in just to prove I wasn't falling apart. At home, Daniel's silence was unbearable. He wasn't cruel, he was polite. That made it worse. He'd still make Noah's lunches, still ask if I needed coffee, still fix things around the house. But every word between us felt rehearsed. When I tried to start conversations, he'd answer with yes or no, then go back to his tasks. One night I asked if we could talk. He said, "About what?" "About us," I said. He looked at me, eyes tired. "Which version? The one you tell people at work or the one that actually exists?" I told him he was twisting things, that everyone was overreacting. Nothing even happened, I said. Marcus and I were friends, that's all. He nodded slowly. Friends who text at midnight, friends who meet after hours in locked offices. My blood ran cold. You've been reading my messages? He didn't answer right away. Then he said, You left your phone on the kitchen counter. I didn't go looking. It found me. I tried to turn it back on him. So now you're spying on me? That's your big revenge? Daniel shook his head. I don't need revenge, Lysandra. I need the truth. But I couldn't give it. Not yet. I told him he was being dramatic, that he didn't understand how work relationships functioned. He didn't argue. He just stood, said goodnight, and walked upstairs. The next day, I called Evelyn. I told her Daniel was making up stories, that he was turning paranoid and controlling. She listened quietly, then said, Lysandra, you need to stop lying. Excuse me, she sighed. He called me. He told me everything. He showed me the messages. My throat went dry. He had no right. He had every right, she said softly. You humiliated him. I hung up before she could say more. I sat there in the car, staring at the steering wheel, realizing everyone was starting to see me the way Daniel did. That evening, I tried one last time to reach Marcus. He finally replied with a single line. Please don't contact me again. It felt like a punch. All those nights, all those whispers about how special I was, gone. I stared at the message until the screen dimmed. Then I walked into the house, trying to keep my expression calm. Daniel was sitting on the couch, reading something. When I asked what it was, he said, Just paperwork. I laughed nervously, trying to make a joke, but he didn't smile. Are you leaving me? I asked finally. He folded the papers neatly, set them aside and said, I haven't decided yet. Don't I get a say in that? He looked at me then, really looked. You already had your say. Every lie was a word in that conversation. I felt a flash of anger. You're not perfect either, Daniel. You ignored me. You made me feel small. What was I supposed to do? Live like a ghost in this house? He stood up. No, Lysandra, you were supposed to be faithful. That quiet line cut deeper than shouting ever could. I turned away before he could see the tears start. Later that night, I heard him in the study, speaking softly on the phone. I caught bits of the conversation: custody arrangements, legal representation, asset protection. My stomach knotted. I realized he wasn't bluffing anymore. For the first time, I was the one afraid to come home. The following week, I tried to pretend things were normal. I made breakfast for Noah, smiled too brightly, and acted like the world hadn't started closing in around me. But the silence in the house had changed. Daniel still spoke to me, but only when necessary. His voice was calm, almost professional, and it terrified me more than shouting ever could. He'd ask what time Noah's school meeting was, or if I'd paid the utility bill. Never anything beyond logistics. He had become a stranger wearing my husband's face. At work, I was officially reassigned to another department. To protect workplace harmony, HR said. Everyone knew what that meant. The whispers didn't stop. They just became quieter when I walked past. Even Fiona, who used to hang on my every word, now gave me a polite smile and turned away. I tried to act unbothered, but every conversation that faded when I entered a room felt like a nail in my reputation. One night, I suggested to Daniel that we go out to dinner, try to reconnect. He looked up from his laptop and said he had too much work. I pressed, Come on, Daniel, one evening won't kill you. He didn't even glance at me. You should invite one of your friends, he said evenly. You're better company for them. It stung, but I forced a smile. Don't be dramatic. I'm trying here. He closed the laptop slowly. Trying to do what, Lysandra? Rewrite the story? I didn't answer. I just turned and went upstairs, pretending his words didn't hit me. But they did. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, telling myself I was still the victim. that if Daniel had been a better husband, none of this would have happened. I repeated that thought until I could almost believe it again. A few days later, Fiona texted me, asking if I wanted to join her and some friends at a wine bar downtown. I jumped at the chance. I needed to be around people who didn't look at me like I was toxic. I spent extra time getting ready, choosing a red dress Daniel used to love. When I walked downstairs, he barely looked up from his phone. "Going out?" he asked. "With friends," I said. He nodded. "Good. Maybe they still answer your calls." It was cruel, but delivered so quietly it sounded almost polite. I didn't reply. I just grabbed my bag and left. At the wine bar, the lights were soft, the music loud enough to drown out my thoughts. For the first hour, I felt almost normal. We laughed, complained about work, pretended we were still young and carefree. But then Fiona made a joke about office gossip, something about everyone knowing who to avoid getting too close to. The others laughed. I smiled stiffly, pretending not to understand, but my cheeks burned. "Come on, Fiona," one of them said. "That's not funny." "Oh, relax," Fiona replied. "It's just a joke." Then she looked at me. "You can take a joke, right?" I felt something break inside me. I wanted to throw my drink in her face, but instead I laughed. "Of course I can," I said lightly. "I've been everyone's favorite punchline lately." They laughed awkwardly, unsure how to respond. The night dragged after that. I finished my wine quickly and left early, pretending I had a headache. When I got home, the house was dark except for a small light in Daniel's study. He was on a video call, wearing his glasses, speaking in that steady tone I used to find comforting. I stood in the doorway listening. He was talking to a lawyer, his lawyer. Words like asset division, custody framework, and property title floated through the air. He looked up when he noticed me. For a moment, our eyes met through the reflection of his computer screen. Then he said to the person on the call, "I'll send the documents tomorrow." I walked away without a word, my heart hammering. I wanted to confront him, to demand that he stop making everything so formal. But part of me knew it was too late. The man who once begged for my attention had turned into someone I couldn't read anymore. The next morning, I tried to start a conversation while he made coffee. "We can fix this," I said. "We don't need lawyers." He stirred his cup calmly. "You already fixed it, Lysandra. You just don't like the result." I told him he was being cruel. He said, "No, I'm being careful." That word stayed in my head all day. Careful. Daniel used to be patient, forgiving, maybe even naive. Now he was something else, precise, deliberate, untouchable. I started to feel desperate. When my parents came by that weekend, I expected comfort. Instead, my mother looked tired, my father quiet. They had spoken to Daniel, of course. He'd told them about the affair, about how I'd mocked him to friends, about how he'd found messages I thought I deleted. I tried to explain, to say it was just emotional confusion, that I never meant to hurt anyone. My mother said softly, "You always think your feelings justify everything." I shouted that she didn't understand. My father told me to lower my voice, that Noah could hear us. I turned to Daniel for support, but he was calm as ever, holding our son's hand, leading him upstairs. When they left, I sat alone in the quiet living room, surrounded by the ruins of every lie I'd told. I poured myself a drink and stared at the family photos on the shelf. Every smile felt fake now, every memory hollow. That night, I tried to reach Daniel again. I told him we could go to counseling, that I was willing to do whatever it took. He listened quietly, then said, "You had your chance to talk months ago. Now we're in the stage where things get written down instead of spoken." I didn't even know what that meant until the next evening. I was home alone when the doorbell rang. A man in a suit stood there, holding a thick envelope. He confirmed my name and handed it to me. "Good evening, ma'am," he said. "You've been served." I stood there for a moment, the words not sinking in. The envelope was heavier than it looked. Inside were pages, cold, printed, legal. Daniel's name at the top, mine below it, petition for divorce, custody request, financial disclosures. My throat tightened. I waited for anger to rise, but all I felt was a deep, cold emptiness. I sat at the table, the same table where we used to have dinner, and read every word. The details were meticulous: dates, accounts, evidence. He'd been preparing this quietly for weeks, maybe months. When he came home later, I was still sitting there. He paused in the doorway, eyes flicking to the open papers. I said, "You could have told me." He nodded. "I did. You just didn't listen." "I made a mistake," I said, my voice shaking. "One mistake." He didn't argue. He just said, "That's all it takes." I begged him to reconsider, told him we could start over. He looked tired, older somehow. "I'm not punishing you," he said. "I'm protecting myself and Noah." Then he walked past me, upstairs, leaving me with the papers spread out like pieces of my own confession. For the first time, I realized I couldn't manipulate my way out of this. Every story I'd spun, every excuse I'd rehearsed, it all sounded empty now. The game was over, and Daniel had won without raising his voice. I sat there until the house went quiet, the envelope still open beside me, knowing there was only one page left to read, and that it would decide what little I had left. I didn't open the last page of the papers for almost 2 days. I kept telling myself there had to be a mistake, that this was just a bluff meant to scare me. But Daniel never bluffed, not once in all our years together. When I finally unfolded the last sheet, I realized how completely he had prepared for this. Every date, every message, every withdrawal from our joint account, listed, referenced, and attached. There were even notes about Noah's routines, his school records, and Daniel's proposed custody schedule. It was like reading the story of my own downfall, written in calm legal language. He didn't yell, he didn't accuse, he just documented. That night, I sat in the kitchen staring at those pages until the clock hit midnight. When I finally went upstairs, Daniel was still awake. He was sitting in bed with his laptop, the same calm expression on his face. I stood in the doorway for a long time before saying, "You really went through with it?" He closed the computer and looked at me. "Yes." "You could have at least talked to me," I said. "I tried," he replied simply. "You just preferred to talk over me." I told him he was being cold, heartless even. He didn't argue. "Maybe," he said, "but at least I'm being honest." I hated how composed he was. I wanted him to shout, to break something, to act like the man I thought I could still control. But instead, he turned off the light and told me to lock the door when I left. The next morning, I called the number listed for his lawyer. The secretary transferred me to a man named Mr. Peterson, who spoke with the same detached politeness Daniel had learned so well. He explained the terms. Daniel was seeking primary custody of Noah, partial division of assets, and exclusive ownership of the house. I interrupted him halfway through, saying I didn't understand why Daniel would do this to his own wife. Peterson's tone didn't change. "Mrs. Quinn," he said, "he's not doing anything to you. He's exercising his rights." That word again, rights. I hung up before he could finish. When I got home that evening, the house was too quiet. Noah was at Daniel's mother's for the weekend. Daniel was in the garage, sorting through boxes. I asked what he was doing. "Getting things ready," he said. "For what?" "For when the process moves forward." I told him he was being cruel to Noah, ripping apart his family like this. He straightened and looked at me. "Noah deserves stability. You turned this house into a storm." I started crying, partly from panic, partly from humiliation. "I made a mistake," I said again. "Why do you keep punishing me?" He shook his head slowly. "I'm not punishing you. I'm protecting our son from watching his mother destroy herself." The words hit like glass. I wanted to scream, but instead I laughed, a hollow, desperate sound. "You think you're a hero now? Filing papers doesn't make you righteous." He didn't rise to it. He just said quietly, "This isn't about righteousness. It's about consequences." That night, I called my sister Evelyn, hoping she'd take my side. She didn't. She said, "You should have seen this coming." I told her Daniel was manipulating everyone, turning them against me. She said, "No, Lysandra, you did that yourself." I hung up on her too. Over the next week, the walls started closing in for real. My access to the joint account was restricted. My work email was deactivated after I missed too many days. I called the firm's HR department, trying to sound professional, but the tone in their reply made it clear my position was being evaluated. I had become what people whispered about, but never defended. One afternoon, I came home early and found Daniel meeting with someone in the dining room. A man in a grey suit was explaining something about property transfer forms. I stood in the doorway, uninvited, and asked if I should leave. Daniel said calmly, "We're just finalizing documentation." "Finalizing?" I repeated. "You're dividing everything while I'm standing right here." The man looked uncomfortable, but Daniel stayed composed. "You had every opportunity to be part of the process," he said. "You chose not to." I told him he was erasing me. He said, "No, you erased yourself the night you chose someone else." I couldn't breathe. I walked out of the house and sat in my car, shaking. The world outside looked so normal. People walking dogs, kids riding bikes, while my life was dissolving quietly behind legal language and signatures. That night, I wrote Daniel a letter. I didn't even know why. Maybe I thought if he could read my side without interruption, he'd remember who I was before everything went wrong. I wrote about the loneliness, the stress, the way I felt invisible. I said I didn't want to hurt him, that I just wanted to feel alive again. I left it on his desk. The next morning, it was gone. There was no note, no comment, just the same silent breakfast. When I asked if he'd read it, he said yes. "And?" I asked. He looked up from his coffee. "It explains, but it doesn't excuse." I whispered, "Do you still love me?" He hesitated, then said, "I don't think love should look like this." That was the end of the conversation. 2 days later, I had to meet with both lawyers. Sitting in that office, surrounded by neutral colors and polite voices, I finally realized how little emotion mattered in a place like that. The law didn't care about heartbreak or regret. It cared about evidence, signatures, and timelines. Daniel had all of those. When Peterson read through the agreement, I caught small details that told me how deeply Daniel had thought this through. He'd arranged a separate account for Noah's expenses, listed every major purchase I'd made in the past 6 months, and included documentation of my HR reprimand as proof of professional instability. It wasn't cruel. It was methodical. He'd used every legal tool available to protect himself and our son. When the meeting ended, Peterson said I could take a copy home to review. I carried it like it might burn through my hands. That night, I sat again at the same kitchen table where the story began, reading the final version. Daniel came home while I was still staring at it. I asked if he felt proud of himself. He said, "No, I just feel done." I wanted to throw the papers at him, to shout that he was just as much to blame. But the truth was, he had done nothing but stay silent and lawful while I buried myself. He poured himself a glass of water and leaned against the counter. "You always said you wanted control," he said quietly. "Now you have it. You control your own life. I just won't be part of it anymore." I tried to speak, but nothing came out. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then he picked up his car keys and said, "Noah's staying with me for the next few days. I think you should take some time to figure out who you are when you're not blaming someone else." When the door closed, the sound echoed through the whole house. I looked down at the final page of the document, his signature in black ink, steady and clear. Mine was still blank. For a moment, I thought about tearing it up, pretending it didn't exist, but I knew that wouldn't change anything. Daniel had already won, not with anger or cruelty, but with calm precision. I picked up the pen, and stared at the line where my name belonged. My hand trembled as I signed. The ink bled slightly into the paper. It struck me then, this wasn't punishment. It was the natural end of every lie I told, every manipulation I justified. The law didn't care about tears or apologies. It only cared about what could be proven. When I set the pen down, the house was silent again. The papers were complete. Daniel hadn't shouted, hadn't begged, hadn't taken revenge the way people imagine. He'd simply done what I never thought he would. He stopped forgiving me. And in that quiet, legal ending, I finally understood the thing I'd been avoiding all along. I wasn't the victim in this story. I was the cause.